I'm here to continue my report about Vicaria, personality behind the correctional institution. So let's continue. So Vicaria himself dated his discovery of the Enlightenment to 1761, when he began to read the works of the French and Scottish philosophies, and he discussed them with a circle of young friends led by Puero Viri. So Viriri. So in all the provinces of the Austrian Empire, including Milan, absolutized reform emanating from Vienna continued to encounter entrance entrenched resistance from noble and escalis ecclesiastical ecclesiastical corporation, and from the judicial culture and the ancient regime. So next slide. So Beccaria prepared the edition now regarded as definitive in 1766. So the work became known in France through the translation of André Morlet. So from 1727 to 1819. So he who freely altered the Italian text. Beccaria, for some reason, never protested against this. So, and then it spread throughout Europe. It was attacked by conservatives everywhere, and was defended by adherents. So of the Enlightenment, Voltaire composed a comment, commentary on it in October 1766. Biriri and Beccaria journeyed to Paris to bask in the admiration of the philosophies there, but Beccaria quickly became despondent and fled back to Milan. So next slide. So the penalties themselves should be carefully proportioned to the corresponding crimes and calibrated to the delivery the minimum of punishment necessary. So Beccaria sought in all cases to minimize or abolish the use of violence and the infliction of pain. He argued against the use of torture in the gathering of evidence, highlighting in absurdity, and against the death penalty, emphasizing its failure to deter. The thrust of the work was to guarantee the individual citizens against atri, uh, arbitrariness. So delay, secrecy, and useless and excessive violence of the codification of the law on the application of penal sanctions in overall. So the book is sustained the attack of juridical culture of the ancient regime, so as well as a sketch of the principle on which it owed to the reform, so as to produce the greatest happiness shared among the greatest number. So next slide. So Beccaria mastered the literature of the nascent science on the economics, and his teaching was impregnated with the Enlightenment ideal for building new science of humanity, understanding the evolution of human society, and improving the lives of the entire population. So in 1771, Beccaria requested and was guaranteed membership in a government council and dealt with economic affairs through a succession of such appointment. So he rose to become a senior member of the administration of the state of become a senior member of the administration of the state of Milan. So with responsibility at various times. So for agriculture, industry, trade, and civil and criminal justice, statistics, and public order. So next slide. So in all the provinces of the Austrian Empire, including Milan, absolutist reform emanating from Binan continued to encounter entrenched resistance from noble and ecclesiastical corporation and from the judicial culture of the ancient regime. Beriri and Beccaria and their cohort wished to modernize and rationalize the economy and the legal system in line with Enlightenment secular morality, and they supported government reform. So next slide. So Beccaria prepared the edition now regarded as the definitive in 1777. So the work became known in France through the translation of André Morellet in 1727 to 1819, who freely altered the Italian text. Beccaria, for some reason, never protested against this. So then it spread throughout Europe. So next slide. So next is Cesar Lombroso. So Lombroso's general theory suggested that criminals are distinguished from non-criminals by multiple physical anomalies. So he postulated that criminals represented a reversion to a primitive subhuman type of person characterized by physical feature reminiscent of apes, lower primates, and early humans at the same extended preserve, and he said in modern savages. So the behavior of these biological throwbacks will initiatively be contrary to the rule and expectation of the modern society. So through years of post-mortem examination and anthropometric studies of criminals, so the insane and normal individuals of Lombroso become convinced that the born criminal, rionato, a term given by Ferreri, could be anatomically identified by such item as sloping, so forehead hairs of unusual sizes, asymmetry of the face, so prognatism, excessive the length of arms, so physical stigmata of specific criminals, so such as thieves, rapists, and murderers, so could be distinguished by specific characteristics. So he believed about that. So Lombroso also maintained criminals criminals had less sensitivity to pain and touch, more acute sight. So a lack of moral sense, including an absence of remorse, so more vanity, impulsiveness, vindictiveness, so and cruelty, so and other manifestation such as special criminal argued that the excessive use of tattooing. So next slide. So self-proclaimed and founder of modern scientific psychiatry, Lombroso is pur- purport, purported to have coined in the term of criminology. He institutionalized the scientists of psychiatry in universities. So, his graduating thesis from the University of Pavia dealt with endemic criticism. Endemic cretinism. So, in the next several years, Lombroso fascinated the criminal behavior and society began, and he gained experience managing a mental institution. So, by the 1880s, so his theories had reached the pinnacle of their fame. So, and his accolades championed them throughout the fields of dedicated to examining mental illness. Lombroso differentiated himself from his predecessor and rival Cesar Beccaria through this depicting his positivist school of in opposition to Beccaria. So one so classes of one which centered around the idea that criminals' behavior born out the free will rather inherited uh, in rather inherited in themselves. So next slide. So Lombroso is the subject of a historical novel by former criminal barristers Diana Betrek. So he writing for History Extra. Betrek tells you everything you need to know about him and explains why influence once on today's study of crime and cannot be ignored. It began in Italy in 1871 with a meeting between criminal and a scientist. The criminal was a man named Giuseppe Bilela, a notorious Calabrian thief and astronomist. So next slide. So Lombroso concluded from the evidence as well as that from other criminals he had studied that some were born with a propensity to offend and were also savage throwbacks early man. So the discovery was the beginning of Lombroso's work as a criminal anthropologist. So Lombroso wrote at the sites of that skull. Lombroso concluded from this evidence that some were born with propensity to offend and were also savage throwbacks the early man. So next slide. So next is a thief. So a thief, for example, could be identified by his expressive face, manual dexterity, and small wandering eyes. Habituality murders, meanwhile, had cold glasses tears, bloodshot eyes, and big hawk-like noses, and rapists and jaguars. So Lombroso did not how Lombroso did not however confined his views to male criminals. So he co-wrote his first book to examine the cause of female crime, and concluded, among other things, that female criminals were far more ruthless than male, tended to be lustful, and immodest, were shorter and more wrinkled, and had darker hair and smaller skull than normal women. So they did, however, suffer from less baldness, so said Lombroso. So women who committed crimes of passion had prominent lower jaws and were more weak than their male counterparts, he concluded. So, next slide. So, Lombroso, inspired by his discovery, Lombroso continued his work and produced the first of 5 edition of Criminal Man in 1876. So as a result, Lombroso became known as a father of modern criminology. So one of the first to release that crime and criminals could be studied. Specifically, Lombroso's theory of the born criminal dominated thinking about criminal behavior in the late 19th and early 20th century. So for thousands of years until that point, the dominant view have been that as crime was a sign against God, so it should be punished in fitting manner, and eye for an eye, so and so forth. During the Enlightenment, thinkers such as Jeremy Bentham the and the Italian Cesar Beccaria decided that as we were all rationally beings, the choice of to commit an offenses so was taken by weighting up cause and benefits. If the cause were made high with harsh penalties, then his would put all the determined of criminals. So next slide. So Cesar Lombroso throughout his career, Lombroso not only drew the work of other criminal anthropologists throughout Europe, but also conducted many of his own experiments in order to prove his theories. So this involved using biasery, so contraptions of measure various body parts, and also more abstract things like sensitivity to pain and propensity to tell untruth. So indeed, Lombroso eventually developed a rudimentary prototype of the lie detector. So next slide. So while their left arm was attached by the machine and the right to the induction coil called Romocroft, so subjects would be exposed and to various stimuli, both unpleasant such as electric shocks and sounds of the firing of a pistol and pleasant, for example, music, food, money, or a picture of a nude woman. So the problem was the recording of the result was sometimes chaotic, so which made the conclusions drawn unreliable. So so to say the least of to make matters worse, Lombroso tended to draw an unusual evidence to add weight to his theories, such as old proverbs and anecdotes told him by friends and colleges over the years. So this left his works vulnerable to attack by critics across Europe. All of this perhaps reflects the short sort of man and across short of man. Lombroso was cap, capricious, ebullient, and probably maddening to the work, for although one would imagine never dull. So next slide. So one of his daughters, Paula, described a typical day in his life, composing a typewriter. So correcting proofs running from Boca, so his publisher, to the typesetter, from the typesetter to the library, and from the library to the laboratory in a frenzy of movement. So and in the evening, not tired and wanting to go to the theatre, to the peregrination, one paying a flying visit to another, finishing and the evening at third. So next slide. So he also had in his position death mass from various criminals who had been executed, as well as many skeletons and skulls. Initially, these were housed at his home and then the University of Turin, where he worked in 1892. Lombroso opened a museum for these artifacts. So this closed in 1814 but reopened in Turin in 2010. So and is and then it is well worth a visit. So one of the most prominent exhibits was Lombroso's head in jar of preservative, so which he agree would be donated upon his death in 1909. So next slide. So according to Lombroso, his interest in the occult began where in 1882 he was asked to examine the 14 years old daughter of a family friend. She was thought to be suffering from hysteria and had been vomiting, sleepwalking, and complaining of fatigue. Lombroso concluded this girl was able to see into the future and also to describe that what others were doing when they were far away. She was apparently also able to see, read, and smell with other parts of the body. Lombroso could offer no explanation for this. So next slide. So Lombroso, as well as breaking new ground in his work of criminals, so Lombroso has also been described as a founding father of parapsychology. So a pseudoscience So concerned with the investigation of paranormal and psychic phenomenon, which includes telepathy, so near-death experience and reincarnation. He investigated a psychic medium experience, a psychic medium called Eusapia. So Eusapia Paldino. So participating in sessions led by her, and in one which took place in 1892, and so the medium tied to a campbed. A number of spirits seems to have presented himself. This persuaded Lombroso, among other witnesses, that the spiritual world was a reality, and he considered in the duty of establish beyond double with the assistance of the science. So next slide. So Lombroso, however, add to the general discrediting of Lombroso's ideas was over the year, and for some times his work was viewed as accentuated by the increasing popularity of Eugene's and the use of biological theories of crime by Nazis to justify and the murder of million peoples. So in the post-war period, other more psychological explanation for criminal behavior became more popular, and thus biological theories were largely rejected. So next slide. So in addition of his pioneering work on the female offender, Lombroso was one of the first to use scientific methods to study crime, and he inspired many others to do same. Today's neurocriminology draws some of Lombroso's theories. So to explore cause of criminal behavior, examining, for example, whether or not brain injuries or genetic abnormalities, so it can lead to criminality, or whether violence can be caused by a clinical disorder. Recent studies have found that there may be a genetic origin for violent crime, and that personality traits including criminality can be deducted from the partial failures. The born of criminals, it seems, might not be such a ridiculous idea after all. So that's would be all, and thank you for listening.